Hi, everyone. I'm excited to share this episode with you all. In this episode, I'm chatting with Ellen Hayden, who is one of our sleep coaches here at Sleep and Wellness Coach. A few months ago, Ellen welcomed her second baby, sweet little Josie. When she was expecting, we had the idea to record a conversation about how she was feeling about the idea of transitioning into becoming a mom of two. What she was excited about, what she was worried about, all the things. And then a couple months after Josie arrived, we hopped back on to have a follow-up conversation about how the transition was actually going. I think what I loved most about our follow-up conversation was that Ellen's experience becoming a mom of two was so drastically different than my own. And I think that's such an important reminder. Each of our experiences is unique and legit. So I'm excited to share my two conversations with Ellen in today's episode. And then next week, I'll be sharing an email I received from one of my previous clients about her worries around becoming a mom of two. Because her worries are very close to the actual experience that I had when I became a mom of two. And I want to share that with you as well. All right, let's dive into today's episode with Ellen. Hi, I'm Allison Egidi, a pediatric sleep and wellness coach and a mom of two. I love to help parents find solutions. This is How Long Till Bedtime. Well, hey, Ellen, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. We're going to talk today. Here we are on February 12th, and then we're going to connect again in a few months after you have been a mom of two for a little while. So let's start with a little bit of background to get everyone up to speed. How old is Dominic right now?
He just turned 2 in January, so a little over 2.
And so they will be about 26 months apart, correct?
Yep. Yeah, I think that adds up.
And so, I know. And my girls are 18 months apart, which is closer than we had planned. But, sometimes things don't go as planned. I am curious, was this the age gap that you were targeting, or you did not have something specific in mind?
We were kind of open to whatever, but my siblings and I are all about 2 years apart, and that has been so fun growing up, like from growing up to even now into adulthood, to kind of like all be in about the same phase of life. So I'd say it was like kind of a goal, but we were also open, like if it was earlier, if it was later, however it works. But the 2-year gap was kind of a nice. Dom's older now, he can listen to commands a little better, but still excited. Yeah, still excited for a baby.
And I'm sure people are going to want to know, do you know what you're having?
We do not technically know. The ultrasound tech slipped a little bit, so we think boy, but we're not confident. It could still be a girl, so we'll see.
Did the technician get the shocked look of like, oh, I just slipped up?
So she was doing so good saying he, she, and then she said he after she had seen. And then, totally panicked. So we were talking about it. I'm like, I'm sure she feels, like, even if it was a mistake, like she said he and it was a mistake, I'm like, I'm sure she feels so bad. Like, oh no, I just panicked. But again, it could be anything.
Right, because then she can't say, no, I didn't mean he, it's a she. I
right.
mean, she can't.
She had I'm sure she felt so bad. So, but we'll see, we don't know for sure. We didn't see anything and it wasn't in a report, but I will be very surprised if it's a girl.
That's a tough gig for those technicians.
Oh yeah. Especially when some people want to know and some don't. Yeah.
Right. Wouldn't it be funny if she does that on purpose to make you think she slipped up and then it turns out it's a girl?
Right, because I'm like, that could be the case too. Who knows?
I doubt she would do that, but
yeah,
could be entertaining on her part.
Right.
So how has this pregnancy gone as compared to your first pregnancy?
Yeah, great question. I feel like last time, first pregnancy, I was more so like looking things up, like what's happening around 12 weeks, what's happening around 20 weeks. Where this time I am chasing a toddler around instead of worrying about what's going on in my body at 30, however much weeks. So it's been interesting. I definitely felt a lot more sick at the beginning this time around. And I'm feeling a lot more tired in the third trimester. So I don't know if that's just because like rest isn't as easy with the toddler.
Right.
So I'm kind of feeling all of those things a little more. But I was convinced that it was a girl for a very long time because I was feeling more sick and just felt so different than I did with Dominic. But yeah, it's definitely been different.
I know, it's funny because the first time around, I feel like I was ready for each new week. And the second time around, it was almost the opposite of, oh my gosh, now I only have 20 weeks. Oh gosh, now I only have, there's so much on your plate when you have another child to take care of. And it's funny how your mind can kind of shift with the second one from anticipation, not dread, but just like, I have a lot to do and I still have this person I'm taking care of and all the ducks, and you got to get all the ducks in a row. It's just a different feeling,
right.
At least in my experience.
No, I agree. And that's kind of how I feel like preparing for birth and labor and after and everything. So I'm like, before I did some research, read some things, but I hadn't had any experience of it. So I just kind of went in open-minded. I didn't really want to go in with a plan because if it didn't go as planned, I didn't want to be like upset by that. So I kind of just went in with like, this is what I've heard, this is what I've seen, we'll see what happens. And now this time I, haven't taken any classes or done much, more research just because I already did all of that. But now I have the experience of the first one. Yes. So I'm like, oh no, am I going to expect it to be the same way?
Right.
So that'll be interesting to see how that goes because the prep is less. Like I feel like I've prepped less for this one. But I also have experience on the other end. So I don't know. We'll see.
The good and the bad.
Right.
Yes. I went in with a birth plan with my second, no birth plan with my first, other than I want an epidural. And then with my second, it was, I want this baby out in 2 pushes. And they were like, whoa, whoa, sleep. I'm like, oh no, I did 5.5 hours the first time around.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Not doing that again, but I did it. I got her out in 2 pushes.
Wow, nice. There you go.
So when you think about becoming a mom of 2 versus being a mom of 1, what are you most excited about?
I think I'm most excited really to see them interact together, like to see how Dominic interacts with another baby, and kind of like watch them grow up together. Because I would say it's kind of hard, and what I guess this is probably, one of the things coming as a challenge would be like, how do I share my love for Dominic with another baby? Like, how am I supposed to do that? And parents do it all the time, right? There's plenty of parents with multiple kids and they do just fine. So that's been kind of something that I've been like worrying about, but I have to remind myself of like, but they are going to be so good for each other. Like, Dom's not always going to be a 2-year-old who wants to talk to his mom and wants to play with his mom. He eventually will be a high schooler who wants nothing to do with his mom. So it'll be good for him to have a sibling that he can grow up with and share things and experiences with as well. So I'm really excited about that part. That'll be fun.
And what are his feelings? So I know he's just 2, but what are his feelings around this whole transition into being a big brother?
He loves babies, so he gets very excited about babies, which is good. I'm not sure what he's going to think about the fact that the baby never leaves. Like, we have friends come over with babies, and, it's fun. We say hi, we give them hugs, we're gentle, but then the baby leaves eventually. So I'm not sure how that transition's going to go, where he realizes, like, oh, wait, this isn't someone else's baby. This is our baby. I'm hoping it's a quick transition and that he's just like, okay, yay, this is our baby. But we'll see. He's not a super like selfish kid and he shares a lot. So I think he'll be okay with it. But I don't know. It's funny. He'll like talk to my belly sometimes and be excited and like give it hugs and kisses, and then other times he's like, no, put it away, like it's time to play basketball or something else. Like he's like, no. I'm like, well, we won't get to do that when the baby's here, so we'll see how that goes.
It's a big adjustment, I think, for them to realize the baby's not going anywhere.
Yeah. I was talking to my husband.
Parents.
Right. So I was talking to my husband, and I was like, well, I think like Dom is going to get the baby a gift, and the baby will bring Dominic a gift. And he's like, why do we need to do that? And are we going to do that like every kid that comes? I'm like, no, just this one. And it's like a peace offering. Like we need to almost have a peace offering. Dominic doesn't understand that he's going to really love this baby one day. So we need to, start off with a little peace offering, and maybe that'll help him be excited for the baby. We'll see.
God willing.
Right. Right.
So you've touched on it a little bit, that nervousness of how can I love someone as much as I love Dom? And I think everybody has that feeling, and I think everyone has their own description of how it felt, but it's kind of, in my experience, was my heart grew more than I thought it could when I had my first, and then I had my second, and it grew a little more. But what else are you anxious about when you think about becoming a mom of two?
Yeah, I mean, everything from like getting them in the car, going to the grocery together, like what's that look like now? I think all the like little day-to-day things that you start to get like used to and in a routine with just like your current situation. So with one right now, and then kind of all of that shifting and relearning, like what is the best way to get us all in and out of the car and into the grocery store or anything like that. So that's definitely one, just kind of like, how will we make this work? Which we do. People do. It'll be okay. And then also we've talked a little bit about Dom's been kind of like waking up sometimes and just yelling. And I'm like, what's going on? He's getting better, but it's like every once in a while. And so I'm a little nervous, like, will the baby wake him up? And if Dom wakes up on his own in a time that he's ready to wake up, he'll just like quietly sit up. He won't really yell for us. He'll start singing songs. I'm like, that's a perfect ideal situation. But if the baby wakes him up in the middle of the night, well, then Dom also be yelling. So, as we all know with sleep, what that looks like. Yeah. And if wake up is in the middle of the night from the little one, then start waking up Dominic and vice versa.
This makes me want to share a tip real quick.
Please do.
So for anyone listening who's expecting, it's like, oh gosh, I'm also worried about that. One thing I really encourage parents to do is to try not to tell your toddler, if you do that, you'll wake the baby, because that can create that, oh my gosh, they're so worried about the baby. And sometimes if kids start to have that natural jealousy that is going to flare up at some point, it's like, oh, I know how to get these people's attention. I will yell out in the middle of the night or early in the morning, because they will rush in here because they're so scared that I'm going to wake the baby. And so I try to urge parents that even because our kids aren't robots and every night's not going to be perfect, you resist that urge of like, don't scream, you'll wake the baby in the middle of the night. And then the flip side of that is sometimes they realize, to your point, it seems like they're up with that baby. So they expect me to sleep, but it appears they're up with that baby. And I always say you can give them a little bit of a leg up by saying, man, you got some great sleep last night. You're such a great sleeper. And you can kind of proactively do this and say, you know who's not a great sleeper yet? Your little brother or your little sister. They are not old enough to be a sleep champion yet. And man, I'm a little tired. I cannot wait for your little brother to be a sleep champion like you. You kind of build them up that they are kind of have this skill set, and the baby's not quite there yet, but we can't wait until the baby can be a sleep champion too. And so sometimes I find that's helpful, because in the middle of the night, sometimes kids can be curious about, like, I hear that baby. Are they up with the baby? Or I hear that baby. Do they know that baby's crying? Are they aware that baby's up? And so sometimes I think it's helpful to say, like, did you know new babies, they don't know how to sleep all night yet, like a sleep champion. And so you can kind of prep them a little bit in that regard. But I also think it's absolutely amazing how kids who have good sleep habits like Dom, they sleep through stuff. Even when you think, oh my gosh, it's 11 p.m. and this baby is unconsolable, they'll just snooze right on through. So hopefully he'll surprise you.
Hopefully, yeah. Hoping for some good surprises here. But I do, yeah, that's a great idea. I didn't even think to kind of like preface it like that and even say like, hey, just because the baby's up doesn't mean you have to be up, but also like, you know, you won't wake the baby, you know, not saying things about waking the baby. That's something that I feel like is so natural to say, like, all right, be quiet, baby's sleeping or whatever. But yeah, how that can totally in their mind be like, oh, that's the thing. Like, that's what I need to do.
Exactly. And I totally hear you on the logistics. I always think of my dad, something he told me, and I'm one of 4. Remind me how many siblings you have.
I have 3 sisters.
1 of 4.
Yep.
So my dad would tell me as I was pregnant, 1 + 1 does not equal 2 when you go from 1 to 2 kids. It's going to feel like you have an army of kids. It's going to feel much more than 2. And I remember thinking, that's so weird. But it did feel that way. Even though my husband and I were both there, we were both doing the things, I remember thinking, I feel like we don't have enough hands. There are just so much happening. And I also remember having this thought of, how did I ever think I was busy when I just had 1? Which I realize isn't legit. Going to having 1 is a big transition, but once I had the 2, it was like, how did I ever think I was busy? And I never went on to have more, but I have people who say, actually, the transition into 3 and into 4 is easier than that transition into 1 to 2.
Wow. Yeah. One of my husband's sisters, she has, I think, 6, maybe 7 now.
Oh, boy.
And I feel like, I'm like, how do I feel so busy with 1? And with 7, you're like, oh, I'll do this and I'll, make that and have you guys over. I'm like, I'm always so impressed by that. But I think kind of similar to what you're saying, like 1 to 2, like 0 to 1, 1 to 2. And then as you keep having them, they get more, the older ones get more and more helpful and can maybe help out a little bit. But yeah, at the 2-year gap with just 2 of them, 2 under 3,
Yes.
makes it a little hard because they're both very needy still. Or they both will be.
Yeah, he's still a baby.
Yeah.
I mean, he could be a little more helpful, I guess, than Addison could be at 18 months. But it made me realize that she was still a baby because she had all this. She wanted to be carried too. It's like, I can only carry so many people at the same time. Right. But I will say, seeing them interact, it really does make your heart explode when you see the cuteness. And we have videos of her making Ainsley laugh. Oh, so cute.
I am excited for that.
What plans have you made around when you initially come home for kind of Dom, as far as how are you going to do try to get a sense of normalcy for him? Do you have family that's going to help out? How are you going to navigate those early weeks, or are you just going with the flow?
A little of both. My mom lives just right down the street, like 2 minutes away from us, which will be really nice. And she, with me working part-time right now, she watches Dominic every other day. So he's very used to being with her and seeing her every other day and like sleeping at her house and, doing all of those things. So that'll be nice that she's here and can help out. And Dom's used to that. Like, that's a normal routine for him. That wouldn't be something totally crazy. I will say we're planning on not bringing Dom to the hospital and having them meet at our house. I know some people do the hospital, but Dom's a very sensitive kid and very empathetic. And so I think if he were to see me in the hospital, he would be very worried and not want to leave, and it would just be a whole ordeal. So we want it to kind of be a little more normal, like in a normal environment for him when they meet. So we'll, bring him back here, and then they'll meet here, and the days and weeks following. My husband gets like a full week off, and then he's planning on taking 2 weeks half days. So that'll be nice to have extra hands around the house for like nap time with Dom, and then just the baby in general. But so we'll see, kind of go with the flow. I try to do that so that I don't get disappointed if things don't go as planned.
Well, and it's nice you have support nearby. You know, you have family nearby to help.
Yes.
And we did the same thing. We did not have Addison come to the hospital just because she's a big feelings, empathetic child as well. And we thought this seems like it's going to add to her stress level. Even though I think all those hospital pictures are so cute when people have their babies meet.
Yes.
But we did just bring Ainsley home and have them meet at home as well. So I don't think there's any one right answer to that. Nor does she have any recollection of it, just to be clear.
Right, that's what I'm thinking. Like, well, how much will he really know or remember that all went down? So I guess maybe more so for the ease of my mind of like, if he doesn't come to the hospital, then I don't have to see him leave sad and everything will be okay.
Totally. So. When you think about bringing this baby home versus the first go around, do you feel less anxious about, I guess, the unknown, or do you feel like, oh my gosh, it's been 2 years, I've forgotten everything?
I think I fall somewhere in the middle because like it's been 2 years and I forgot everything, and I'm not, like I said, like I'm not looking things up anymore. Like it's not like, what do you do with the newborn? Because now I'm running around with the toddler. So like when I brought Dominic home, I felt like I was constantly seeing different things, reading different books or watching different videos or whatever on how to care for a newborn, which a lot of it, your child's different than everything you see. So you learn a lot as you go. But I think, it's a little different because I'm like, I'm not just invested in what do I do with this newborn, but hopefully it's like riding a bike and it all just comes back, and all the experience we had with Dominic will hopefully just play into this one too.
In a good way, in the best way.
Yeah.
So I remember when I was preparing to bring Ainsley home, there just being two things that I knew I wanted to do differently or to handle differently on the second go around. And one was how I was going to handle sleep. And then the other was that I was going to give myself a lot more grace around breastfeeding, nursing, bottle feeding, and not put as much pressure on myself to be disappointed like I was the first go around. And so I'm curious, as you've already said, you've kind of been through this process once, so you're going into delivering a little bit differently than you did the first time. Are there things when you think about these early weeks and months that you want to approach differently, whether it be with the baby or personally as you kind of transition into having two?
Yeah, that is a good question. It's kind of hard. I don't know. I feel like Dom was such a good baby. Like, besides when we had our little around a little before 4 months sleep conundrum situation, like it was easygoing, super easy baby. And so like even nursing and breastfeeding, all of that was like, he picked up on it right away. And I know like I've heard your story a few times and other people's stories where it just didn't click and things weren't working. So I'd never had to kind of like experience that. So I guess this time, like going into it, kind of like you're saying, like giving myself grace before it even happens, because Dom was so good and so easy that I'm like, what are we in for? Like, what are we in for this time? So kind of trying to go in open-minded and just like allowing myself to understand like it's not going to be exactly like Dom was. And if it's a little harder and if things don't work out, like, it's okay. And I think kind of trying to have that mindset now before all the hormones go crazy too, hopefully will be a little helpful, because I know that can play a huge role, like being postpartum, waking up all the time, not having enough sleep, like you kind of lose some of like where you were grounded before. So kind of trying to start very grounded and like with realistic expectations that like things could go totally different, totally wrong, or totally great. But just like allowing myself to recognize like it's not my fault. Like whatever happens, it's not anyone's fault. It's not the baby's fault. It's not my, and kind of being open to what the new baby's going to teach me about myself. Maybe more patience.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know.
I think that's a great point, because there is the preparing Dom to be a big brother. There is preparing yourself to take care of 2 children and think about all the logistics of getting in and out of the grocery store, which gave me heart palpitations just when you brought it up, because I kind of forgot about that. All of those logistics. But then the other big piece is your mental health. And not only can a baby's personality be very different, in fact, they typically are quite different and unique, but also your experience postpartum could be very different, just how you've experienced your pregnancy being different. And so I'm really glad you brought that up. And I loved everything you said about, being thoughtful about how you're doing and giving yourself grace on that front. How was your postpartum experience after Dom? Did you have a pretty good postpartum experience, or was it challenging? Obviously there's always challenges, but I'm curious on, when you look back now removed from it, how would you describe your postpartum experience?
It was definitely interesting. Like I feel like things that normally wouldn't bother me bothered me. Like one of the things with nursing was like every 3 hours I know what I'm doing. Like, around 3 hours, could be more, could be less. And I found myself actually getting like very jealous of my husband, who could go do something for however long he wanted to and not have to be thinking about like, oh, is the baby hungry? Does the baby need me? Do I need to relieve, like, do I need to pump, or do I need to relieve myself in that way? So I found that to be really surprising. Because typically I am like a homebody. I don't need to leave. I don't need to do anything. But it really, I think, like postpartum and just being tired and kind of wanting to feel more like, I guess, myself again, when that was kind of hard to do. And I kind of had to like remind myself that like, you're in motherhood now, like you're giving yourself for this baby always. Like this is how the rest of your life is going to be, not exactly in this manner. But yeah, like little things like that, I found myself getting a little more like emotional or frustrated about. But overall, I would say it was a pretty good experience. And I found a lot of times, like if either my husband or I were kind of like going through it, like whether it was the middle of the night and one of us were like, we just can't do it anymore. The other one seemed to always be able to step up and like step in for each other. So I don't know, I had no control of that, but I'm hoping that happens again this time, and that we're kind of able to like bounce off of each other's like times when we need a little help. So
totally. And do you have memory of when you started to feel more like yourself again? Do you remember around how old
I was
Dom
just
was?
thinking about that. I can't remember like when all of a sudden I was like, oh, I'm a human. Like I'm here. It's okay. But there was, a very distinct time. But yeah, I can't remember when that happened, because we were talking about, we have friends getting married 2 months after our due date. And I was like, am I going to be normal again? Like, am I going to be able to handle that? Like, I don't know. Because I can't remember when that happened.
Okay. Well, we're going to circle back on this because that's a whole nother aspect, I think, of the postpartum journey. When you have more than one, it's already tough enough to know I have this newborn dependent on me. And then now you have a toddler as well. So that's a whole nother aspect of the transition. I'm curious how your husband's feeling about transitioning from 1 to 2 kids. Is he nonchalant? Is he one of a big family? What are his thoughts of this transition?
He's the third oldest of 10 total. So
whoa,
he has a lot of siblings. And he's, one of the older ones. So he's helped out a lot and been around babies for a very long time. So he's super helpful and awesome when it comes to like Dominic, and he will be this way with baby number 2 as well. He would say that he is very excited, but also like he's like, I remember the newborn stage. Like, I know what that is like now. And so I think there are definitely some like stressors and anxieties that come along with it, and even things that like we can't think of or prepare for. Like he'll say sometimes like, oh, I'll get to hang out with Dominic a lot because you'll have to be nursing the baby. And like for me, I'm like, but that also is hard because I don't want Dominic to think, oh, now we have a new baby, I'm always with dad, I'm never with mom, so kind of like trying to balance all of those things. I think that causes a little bit of like tension. Like, what are we going to do? How are we going to make that work? But overall, excited, and he has so many siblings, so he is excited for Dom to have a sibling.
He's a pro.
And, yeah, he's got it down.
What's the gap between your husband and the youngest?
So their youngest is a junior in high school. Yeah.
Still right now?
Right now. Mm-hmm.
So
and my husband's like 30 something. 30.
So
exactly.
That's a pretty good gap.
Yeah. And so there's 2 older than him.
So there was 11 or 12 years between my youngest brother and me. And I also have very clear memory of him, and I was a good helper. That's what I tell people. I was just communicating with someone who has a 10-year-old and just had a baby. And I said, oh, that child's going to be a helper. They're legit helping. I was legit babysitting for my little brother, which was kind of fun. Wow, 1 of 10. That's going to take me a while to recover from. That's a lot of children. They are still raising children over at that house.
I am always so impressed by his mom. I'm like, I don't know how you do it. You're so good at it. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
She's definitely someone I look up to.
Yeah. So that feeling of your oldest becoming closer with your husband, I do remember that. And I will say, although I think it's a positive, granted my kids were just 18 months apart, but Addison did become very close with my husband during that time. And I would say there's a decent part of her that maybe he's her parent of preference. The season wanes, which is why I hesitate. There are moments where I feel like she has a strong draw to me versus a strong draw to him. But she often, since that period, would be quick to be kind of a daddy's girl, which I think is hard for any parent when the other parent becomes the parent of preference. But what I also found during that time, and I wish I'd had this knowledge and tool sooner, was because I really didn't start implementing this till she was closer to 3. So maybe when Ainsley was about 18 months, she just needed short periods of my complete undivided attention. And I was giving her undivided attention because, like you said, you feel like, oh, I want to spend time with them. But she, and I don't think all kids are this way, but she had become very consumed without communicating this to me, of that feeling of mom's always feeding the baby. I did breastfeed with Ainsley, and I think she just had this feeling of mom's always taking care of this baby. And so I don't even think she always registered when I was spending time with her. But once I transitioned to pointing it out to her and saying, hey, I have 30 minutes until I have to make dinner. I never said until I had to do things with the baby, but I had 30 minutes left to go do this. And I want to just have special time with you and mommy and Addison special time. And then I would wrap it up. Sometimes I would even have to set a timer on my phone. I'd set this timer and then I have to go make dinner. And then at the end, I would say, I loved having that special time with you. That was a game changer for her kind of changing her demeanor of not acting out at Ainsley as much. So that's what we were experiencing, is she would act out towards her. And I would just tell you that even if you feel like I only have 10 minutes a day where I can hand the baby off to my husband and be completely focused on Dom, it will make a world of difference to him. And I think you'll see that that connection is even tighter than you could imagine. But sometimes you have to point it out to them, that I'm filling your cup right now and that I loved filling your cup. And then you can still have that great connection, even though technically he might be spending more time with your husband.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because, that might be like, to me, I'm like, oh, I'm filling his cup and he's filling my, my cup too, of like, we're still getting this personal time. But without pointing it out, it could be, because that's all he's had up to this point, it could just be like, oh, this is the normal, like, this is what I was used to. And then what I'm used to is getting cut short. But yeah, pointing it out as like, this is our time, like, we get to spend time together, this is special time, and like really giving it a name.
Yes, I had a client who I was talking to about this, and she said, oh yes, our therapist told us about this and said, you need to make sure you get credit. And it's like, oh yeah, that is true. You are kind of trying to make sure you get credit, not in a bad way, but in my mind, they're just so overwhelmed that some of it goes over their head unless you can kind of bring them back to, like, hey, look, we're spending time, just the two of us. So that would be my little tip, even in those early days, even if it's just 10 minutes where you hand the baby off to your husband and pour into him. And I think you'll find it's a really powerful tool to keep that connection strong. And I still find it's effective with my kids, but I still find even at 9 and 11 that I have to point it out to them. I could spend a whole day with Addison, and then she might say, you never spend time with just me. But I could say, I was just with you yesterday. And she's like, oh yeah. But if I pointed it out, we're having a whole day, just you and I together, the whole energy shifts. So I think sometimes we're just so busy that they don't always register.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Any last thoughts on things that you're nervous about, excited about, or have we touched on all of it?
I'm trying to think. I feel like we've touched on most of it. I would say, I guess that something I'm really excited about is that this baby is due like the end of March. And so it should hopefully be a little warmer. And so we'll get to spend some time outside, and Dom loves being outside. So I think that'll kind of help him with the transition too, is that it's nice outside and we get to play and enjoy time, and we just have an added bonus, an extra baby.
Yeah, and I think that being able to be outside more is helpful with the postpartum period as well, because I had a January baby. I hate the cold, so didn't love going outside, and then Ainsley was born in July, and I think my willingness to be outside with the better weather helped me postpartum for sure.
Right. Yeah, and getting some sun and some fresh air will help.
Absolutely.
Lighten the mood, make it better.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait for you all to welcome this sweet little boy or girl. We'll be on the edge of our seat. And I also can't wait to circle back in a few months and to hear how things are going and what surprised you, and all about this baby's personality as compared to Dom's personality and all the good things. So thank you so much, Ellen, for your willingness to share. I think this is a time and transition point that a lot of parents have angst about. So I think people are really going to enjoy hearing this before and after conversation. So I look forward to connecting very soon.
Thank you. Thanks for the tips and everything throughout. So look forward to sharing how it goes.
Well, welcome back, Ellen. We had our first conversation back in February. Wow, does time fly? It feels like that was just yesterday. And it's now the end of May when we are recording this. And sweet little Josephine arrived back in March. So before we dive into all the things about your transition into becoming a mama too, tell us how old Josephine is now.
Josephine is 2 months as of yesterday, I think. So just turned 2 months.
Awesome. Well, let's just start from the beginning of becoming a mom of two. How did your delivery go? Was it what you expected? How did it compare to your delivery with Dom? Like different, the same, similar? Give us the scoop on that.
Yeah. Um, so I try with both of them to go in with very minimal expectations because I feel like the second I have expectations, it goes the complete opposite way. So I was expecting to hopefully have a healthy baby, and that's it. But when I compare it to Dominic, it was so different. I labored for 24 hours with Dominic and like didn't progress at all. My OB said I couldn't get an epidural until I got a certain like level of dilation, and I just wasn't getting there. I wasn't progressing, but I was having contractions. So it felt like it took forever with nothing happening. And then with Josephine, I woke up in the middle of the night and was having some contractions, but I wasn't like super uncomfortable. And then eventually I was like, okay, mom, you should probably come over and watch Dominic. We were going to go to the hospital. So we went in and they were like, you're already 7 centimeters dilated. Like, let's get going. And so it was like two totally different worlds, like where I labored forever with nothing happening to coming in and already being like, all right, let's go. But it stalled a little bit, and I kind of stopped contracting after I had an epidural, but whatever. Had an epidural, I didn't really notice. And then she was there in like less than 10 hours. So it was like just totally different experience. And we were very surprised. We didn't know gender, and we were so surprised when she was a girl because we were convinced by the ultrasound tech that she was going to be a boy. So that was an incredible experience too.
Yeah, that's so fun. So you really did feel pretty shocked when they said it's a girl.
Yeah, total surprise.
That's amazing. And did you have a girl name picked out?
We did, and it was funny because when the ultrasound tech said he, and we were convinced it was a boy, I was like, oh, that's good because I have a long list of girl names that we can choose from and that we both agree on. But when it comes to boy names, we really have a hard time. So I was like, this is good. It'll help us get serious about picking a boy name. So yeah, we had a girl name ready to go.
Awesome. I love it. Well, the other big thing that we have to address right out of the gate once we have a baby is feeding. So I would love to hear about your experience with feeding her. And was it similar to the experience you had with Dom? Was it different? Did things go smoothly? How did that transition go?
Yeah, both of them were pretty similar. They're both really good eaters. Dom had a little bit of a time where I think it was his allergies that we didn't know about, but that he kind of stopped gaining from nursing. And so we had to implement a little formula and everything. But right now with Josephine, she's doing great. Both of them almost immediately during I think they call it like it's the golden hour, or I can't remember what they call it, like right after birth when they do skin to skin with mom and they just kind of like wait for the baby to be able to nurse right away.
Yep.
She, like the second she came out, was like, all right, let's go, I'm starving. The nurse left and came back in and she's like, she's nursing already? I was like, I don't know. Like, she's just jumped right on. I don't know what happened. So both of them really took to nursing really well, which I'm really grateful for because I know that can be a really trying and hard situation for a lot of people. So she's doing great. Awesome. She was back to over a pound over birth weight at her first like 1 week appointment. So she's taken all the nutrients in.
She's crushing it.
Yeah.
Well, of course, I want to hear about sleep as well. But first, before we get to that, I'm going to kind of save it for the last part. I want to hear how Dom handled becoming a big brother, because I know this was something that you had a little anxiety about. And before you share that, let's just remind everyone how old he was when Josephine was born. And then just let us know, like, how did it go at the very beginning? And now you're 2 months in. Like, what has this looked like? Because it can change day to day with the toddler. So give us the scoop on that.
Yeah, absolutely. He was just over 2 years old. So like, I think 2 years and like 3 months or something. So just barely over 2 years old when she was born. He has been all over the place. So at the very beginning, it was very much so like, he's a big feelings sort of kid, like, and he'll let you know, like, he will say, I'm sad, I'm happy, I'm excited, all the things. But he was having a hard time like really pinpointing those emotions at the beginning. And he would have like super high highs where he was like so excited about everything and everything going on. But then also like all of a sudden he would have a really low low about something that like normally wouldn't set him off. So like a toy being in the wrong spot, or like his car not moving the exact way he wanted it to, or whatever. And it would be like the saddest temper tantrum. And it was clearly not the toy not moving.
Yes,
It was
right.
clearly everything else that was going on. And that little thing just kind of pushed him over the edge. So he had kind of some struggles there at the beginning. And I would say probably one of the hardest things with the transition to two also came with that, because I wasn't able to like pick him up right away, right after giving
Yeah.
birth. And that was something I never like thought about like being hard. But like when he would have those meltdowns about something that was so small, and like I knew that wasn't what it was, like all I wanted to do was just like scoop him up and hold him. And so that led to like my husband taking him and like helping him and taking care of him. And if someone else was visiting, like they would maybe go to a different room to kind of like de-escalate the situation. And I found that to be really hard because like I was normally that go-to person to help him like regulate his emotions, or we did it together or whatever. But that wasn't me like in those moments. And so that was
Yeah.
really hard to see, and like because I just saw the meltdown and then I saw him totally fine. I didn't see like the coming down phase, so I missed out on those moments and like seeing the process work out. But once that shifted a little bit, like once we got away from the extreme highs and extreme lows, he's been really awesome and he's been a big helper. I've been trying to like acknowledge like you're doing such a good job and you're being a big helper, but also saying like it's hard to be a big brother. Like it's hard to see this, and like talking him through that so he knows like it's okay to not want to go get mom a burp cloth if I ask for it or to like
Yeah.
feel like it's hard to also take into account Josie's emotions and all those things. So trying to acknowledge both sides, like the high highs and the low lows and all of it in between.
Yeah. And has he acted out on her at all or no?
Not really. I wouldn't say like in anger. Today she was laying down and he was trying to like play with her, and he kind of like got a little rough and like kind of stepped on her a little bit. So I think most of the time it's like accidental and not like I'm
Yeah.
trying to hurt you because I'm annoyed at you, which I'm grateful for,
Right.
because that that leads to a different conversation than just like, hey, we have to be easy with our the little baby. So he's been rough with her, but I think out of like I love her so much I don't know what to do. Like he's either I want to play with her and my attention's on her and I'm happy and love her, or just like she doesn't exist. Like just kind of moves on and does
Yeah.
his own thing. Like there's not really like I'm paying attention to her and I'm mad at her, which at least
Right.
now I'm sure that that will come and I'll have plenty of sibling fights to look forward to. But right
Once
now it's
she's
been
like
okay.
mobile. Yeah, when
Yeah.
she's mobile and can take his things.
Right.
Yeah, so you probably dealt more with you're still in that stage where it's like, well, I can hold the baby. And it's like, well,
Yes.
actually, that requires a helper.
Yes. He'll say, I want to hold the baby, and like put his hands out. I'm like, okay, here she is. He's like, no, by myself. Like, you let go of her. I'm like, well, here's the thing. You need a little help.
That's right. I like his confidence.
Yeah, right.
How about your postpartum experience? So, just how you felt, both physically, emotionally. Now you didn't just have to adjust to caring for one baby, you had this other child. And so, tell me a little bit about your postpartum experience, which, let's just be clear, at 2 months, you are still in it. But
Absolutely. Yeah.
how have the first 2 months gone?
Yeah. I would say, like, physically and emotionally, the healing has seemed much quicker than with Dominic. So I don't know if it's just like my hormones knew how to like start stabilizing better. I don't know. I think part of it, and we'll talk about sleep later too, but part of it is she's sleeping really well, which leads to me sleeping really well. So I think that's really
Yes.
helpful too, in terms of like emotionally. There are definitely still moments where, like for me, things are harder than I think they would have been if I wasn't postpartum. Like where I think I could brush some things off and move on. Um, they kind of just like feel more intense. And like what I was just talking about, like when Dominic would come down off of those emotional things and I wouldn't be able to be there for him, like I'm sure that happened multiple times before having Josie where someone else took care of him. But like I couldn't see past that, like
Yeah.
that it was my responsibility or that I needed to help. So there's definitely been there's been moments where that's been really hard, but overall, yeah, it's been a pretty good process. It's been a lot better than it was with Dominic. I think a lot of it does come into like plan to sleep. Because with Dominic, we didn't start even thinking about doing any sort of like sleep anything. Like we just would rock him to
Yeah.
sleep and put him down until he was like just almost maybe like 3-4 months. And with her, we started doing stuff when we came home, right? Like not intense sleep training, but there were little things that we did that I think have just helped her become a good sleeper, which overall has helped a lot of
Totally.
different
I
things.
think it's such a good point to make because we already know, or I hope everyone knows because I preach it all over the place, but it has been proven time and time again that the number one way and the least expensive way for a mom to start to feel better, I don't want to say it's a cure-all by any means, is to get at least 5 hours of uninterrupted sleep. And so the research is really clear on that. And I think when you're adjusting, whether it's to your first baby, your second baby, your third baby, your fourth baby, if you're able to get some sleep, it does help your body recover and navigate this postpartum period. And so let's talk about the sleep and what are some of the things that you did differently? Obviously, you've said you started right away thinking about it and you had waited before. But if there are a couple things, if your best friend comes in and says, okay, I'm about to have a baby, what do you think I should do about sleep early on? What are a couple of things that you think, well, I'm so glad I did that differently? Because I have what I did differently with Ainsley, but what are a couple of things that you think that really helped?
I feel like one of the biggest things was helping with the day-night confusion. We took lots of naps like in our sunroom. Like I would just hold her out in the sunroom or even outside some of the times.
Yeah.
It was warmer. She was in March and Dominic was in January. So it was warmer and easier to get
Yep.
outside than it was with Dominic. So like getting outside during the day, and we didn't do any naps like in a dark room. Like it was always napping in daylight. And I think that really helped the day night confusion, like right off the bat. She was able to kind of tell, like, okay, it's dark, we're going to bed. Oh, it's bright outside. And so we did that for a really long time. And I would say even like just now we've started like doing kind of some of the naps in the darker rooms and
Yeah.
still a little lighter. It's not pitch black in there, just to kind of, because we're still doing some naps on the go and because we're napping all the time. So
Yeah.
I wanted her to not be like totally reliant on a pitch black room during
Mm-hmm.
naps, but we're starting to do some more in a darker room. But until now, it was all like windows open, lights on. This is how we're napping.
It really helps. It really helps.
Yeah.
Is there anything you think you did to help encourage her to get longer stretches of sleep? So I guess before we say that, tell us what her night sleep looks like right now. So she's at 2 months. What do things look like now?
The last few nights, we've been doing the last feed around like 9:30 to 10, and she'll sleep till around like 6. So sometimes a little
All the
earlier and
way.
sometimes a little later. But yeah, I've been blown away by that because that is not what we experienced with Dominic. So,
Yeah.
and I think it's the little things that we've kind of done sleep training wise. I rewatched the whole Have Baby Need Sleep Again before
Yeah.
having Josie, just because I was like, when I was doing Dominic, I was thinking about like, this is where he's at, this is what he needs, and I wasn't maybe necessarily listening to it full picture. So I was like, I'm going to come back and listen to it full picture now that I'm sleep coach and have a newborn coming. Like, let's see what all I can take in from this. And I'll say at first, I was like, I'm nervous to start sleep training her, like to start having her put herself to sleep, because I remembered what my experience with Dominic was like. And so I was like, oh, I don't know if I can do it. Like, I'm just a little nervous.
PTSD.
Yeah. But then I like rewatched it and was like, it just helped me to hear we're not gonna she's not going to put herself to sleep every time by herself. And we're not just going to leave her to cry and figure it out. Like she doesn't have the ways to soothe that Dominic did when he was 4 months compared to 2.
Yeah.
And so I was just reaffirmed in like the way that Have Baby Needs Sleep kind of addresses that, because there are tips and strategies to help them learn the skill of putting themselves to sleep without just like throwing them into a dark room and saying good luck.
Yeah.
So like relearning those tips and strategies for what to do with a kid who's 2 months old was really helpful. And I think that she's definitely started to be able to kind of like put herself to sleep at sometimes, like that first nap of the day, put her down drowsy and she dozes off on her own. And so I think that has helped through the night to get those long stretches too, because I guarantee she wakes up a little bit.
Yeah.
Because she moves, like she's in the different corner of the bed, or like angled a little bit, but she doesn't wake all the way up, and she's not like, come help me. Like she must just have picked up some of those skills as we've started to do a little bit of sleep training.
I love it. And are you room sharing with her?
No, not anymore. And that was by my personal choice, because she's a loud sleeper. She's
totally.
She's a grunter, and that's another thing that I think with Dominic, like we picked him up when he started to grunt and make some noise, because like, oh, he's waking up and let's get him back to sleep. But with her, I'm like, nope, she's still sleeping.
Yeah.
So she's a loud sleeper.
So how old was she when you moved her out?
I was kind of recently, so maybe 6 weeks.
Okay.
Maybe.
And I'm curious, was she already kind of sleeping through the night, or did it improve, or just no real difference? She stayed in a pretty good place.
She was pretty much sleeping through the night. I wouldn't say totally or all the way. Like she was maybe having like one wake up, or waking up a little early and then going back down. I think we waited as long. I mean, we didn't wait super long. Like she was out of there pretty quickly, I would say, for a newborn. But we waited as long as we did because our room is like all the way at the end of one hallway, and there's 3 rooms at the other side, and Dom's down there. And so the room we were going to put her in would have then been like right across the hallway from Dominic. So I was like, I'm just a little nervous to put her down there because I don't want it to interrupt his sleep.
Yeah.
So we waited a little longer than I think we would have if it was just her. So she was pretty much sleeping through the night when we moved her.
And I think this is important to note as well, because how old was Dom when you moved him out?
It was probably right when we started sleep training. So around 3-4 months.
Yeah. So, this is another place where I think your journey can look different. So actually, Addison, we had to move out early because I was really struggling postpartum. She was a very loud sleeper. We were so sensitive and in tune to each other that I swear if either one of us shifted in the bed, we woke the other one up. And so she was out of my room, I think, by about 6 weeks. And as we all know, it didn't cure everything because she didn't sleep through the night for a very long time. But it did help both of us sleep a little bit better. Whereas Ainsley, who I did have sleeping through the night at 8 weeks, she was actually a quiet sleeper. So I did do a much better job at not responding to every grunt. I don't think I was as sensitive the second go around, but generally speaking, she didn't move around the bed. I would wake up in the morning, she'd be right where I left her. And she stayed in my room until she was 6 months and just slept like a charm. And so my girls also, their rooms were across, and Addison wasn't sleeping well still. So I didn't want to move her out and have Addison mess up her perfect sleep. But I think this is an example where every child, how noisy they are, how you're feeling postpartum, how sensitive you are to each other, that's going to be different with each child. And what was right for baby number 1 and your situation may not be right for baby number 2. And so I think this is another place where you were open-minded and it helped you along your journey. And then another thing you had mentioned before, and we had shared a reel about it because you mentioned it to me and I said, oh, you should shoot a little video of this, was about how this time you didn't put as much pressure on yourself around every night needing to be perfect. So can you talk a little bit about, in those early weeks, how you approached it when you'd have a great night and then a not so great night?
Yeah. And this kind of goes back to even when I was saying before about like labor. Like if I have expectations, it seems to always go the opposite way. And so I noticed that a lot with her sleeping. There would be some nights that she'd get a great night stretch of sleep. And so I like would put her down thinking, oh, she got 5 hours a little bit ago. So if she goes down now, she's going to wake up, and I'd calculate it, right? Like 5 hours from now. And then I'd fall asleep and she'd be up in 2. I'd be like, wait, wait, we just got 5. What are we doing? Like, what's happening here? And so I did find like when I set those expectations, I think she knew, and she's like, I can't do that. Like, I can't do what you're expecting me to do. Or if but if I went into it more so, like, she's a newborn. This is a night of sleep. If we get 2 hours, that's great. That's awesome. If we get 5, that's incredible. Like, that would be phenomenal. When I shifted my mindset, it not only like lended itself to like allowing her to, I think, just feel relaxed when she went to bed, which allowed her to sleep longer. But also, if there was some fluke that woke her up, it allowed me to not feel so angry. Like, if she was getting up at 2 hours, I could like remind myself, oh, she's a newborn. Like, she might wake up at 2 hours, and that's okay. Like, this is a whole new place for her. Like, this is not what she's used to. She's just trying to figure it out, and I want to try to help her figure that out. And the best way to do that was being open-minded and not having unrealistic expectations for a newborn infant. So kind of, having that open-mindedness about how she's going to sleep was really helpful, because if I had those expectations, they typically were not met, and then it would be really disappointing for me. So that's kind of how I went about it.
I think it's important in the newborn stage, and this is a little bit what I talk about in Have Baby Need Sleep, is you're setting them up for success. But it is all about practice, not perfection. It's about starting to lay a foundation, but the house will not be built in a couple of weeks. And so, I think I loved when you shared that with me, that you felt like once you kind of lowered your expectations, things went a little smoother. And so I just think that's such an important note. And I think it's also worth noting that you could have the perfect mindset and do all the right things, and not every 2-month-old is ready to sleep through the night. And my guess is, and time will tell, and I can't wait to be around for the ride, is that we're going to realize she's fairly naturally inclined to sleep. And that's the case with Ainsley as well. So Ainsley will turn 10 this summer, and it has stayed true that she is pretty naturally inclined to sleep. And the only ever kind of sleep regression I dealt with her was like the 18-month sleep regression, but otherwise she's basically been a dream of a sleeper. And Addison is not as naturally inclined to sleep. She ultimately learned to have healthy sleep habits, but I still have to be on top of her more. She's more easily thrown off, or more likely to be the person that's like, I was awake at night, I don't know what was happening. And I relate to that. I'm not as naturally inclined to sleep well. I am more sensitive, and my husband is, falls asleep in 2 seconds and back to sleep in 2 seconds if he wakes up. And so I also don't want people to hear this and think, what's wrong with those two? How did they figure this out? And what's wrong with me that my 8-week-old's not sleeping through the night? Some of it is a natural talent, and then it's just laying that foundation to kind of help guide them there. So I love that you got a great sleeper for your second, as did I, and it's such a treat, and I hope all parents get to experience one, because the experience is very different, since I've had one of both, between a child who really needs to learn how to sleep well and who's very sensitive, to the more relaxed child who just needs some guidance in the right direction. It is night and day, that experience.
I was just talking to a friend who was like, we're just so lost about sleep. And I use the analogy that you use, like, it's like a sport. Like, some people are really great at playing soccer. Like, they can just walk out there and kick and shoot and score and they're phenomenal, right? And then there's some who need the instruction, and they need to be taught, like, this is how you do it. And then once they're taught, like, they can succeed as well. Like, you can see that play out. And I would say, like, Josie falls somewhere with like some natural sleep, and like, she's inclined to sleep well on her own. And then also there's been a little bit of things that we have done that we didn't do with Dominic that have helped like fine tune that skill that she already had, so that, she's doing as good as she's doing right now. And that doesn't mean we're not gonna hit some bumps in the road, but that we are able to kind of take those skills and help her to use them to the best of her ability. So
Absolutely. You're just channeling them in the right direction,
yeah,
as we would have to with a natural athlete too. I mean,
right.
you really have to maximize that talent. You have to challenge or channel it, so that they can maximize their skills.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think one thing that we should touch on is having a baby who is able to sleep through the night early and how that affects the feeding relationship. And I know some people listening were probably thinking, but I'm exclusively breastfeeding, and how is this going to affect my supply? And while I absolutely think everybody's feeding journey is unique, and so not everyone is going to have the same experience that you're having, but I would love for you to just share what that looked like and how you navigated Josie starting to sleep longer stretches and your supply and feeding. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the first week, we were still waking her up every 3 hours. And then, yeah, once we went back for that like 1 week appointment, she was over her birth weight. And so the doctor said, you can stop waking her up and kind of letting her see how she does. And that was really exciting. And that's when we kind of got to test with how long she could make it. But then, yeah, once she started sleeping through the night, there were times that I would wake up and feel like, oh no, I need to feed her for my own sake, not necessarily for her sake. So it was reaffirming to know like she's not starving, like she can make it for a
Yeah.
super long time. But then, yeah, that sometimes I needed the relief and needed um, something. And so what I ended up doing was just waking her up in those moments. Like if I woke up from being uncomfortable, from needing her to nurse, then I would wake her up and have her nurse as my body adjusted. Another option could be pumping to relieve some of that, if that's something that you're wanting to do, and then you can have a little bit of a stash stored up if you ever need to give a bottle. But yeah, kind of being able to adjust in those moments so that my body didn't like explode because that's what it felt
Yeah.
like. So I woke her up.
When you're in those early weeks, I think it's fine if you wake up and you're uncomfortable and you need to feed, because I know there's always that fear of, well, what if I pump and then she does wake up in 10 minutes? And I've worked with moms who have that fear. And so I think it's great that you were able to kind of work with everyone. You were able to let her sleep as long as she could while also meeting your needs and giving your body time to adjust its kind of production schedule. And so how many days, once you started to sleep more consistently, kind of for these long stretches, how many days did it take your body to adjust where you felt like, oh, I have to get up and proactively feed her without her even waking up?
Just a couple, I would say like 2 or 3 really, until my body kind of regulated there. And I know that can be different for everyone, but yeah, just a few days of waking her up, and then my body, I still, when she wakes up, I'm still like, okay, yeah, I'm ready too, but it wasn't waking me up anymore.
Yeah.
Um, and for the same reason you just mentioned, that's exactly why I fed her, because I was one of the moms that was like, if I pump right now and she wakes up in 10 minutes, then like, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
So that's exactly why I woke her up in those moments, but it was pretty quick to adjust and regulate and get back to normal. And there are still some times that maybe she sleeps an extra hour or two, where I wake up and I'm like, oh no. But for the most part, it's not as bad as it was when it was first starting to regulate. Like I
Yeah.
can fall back asleep and know she'll be up in a few minutes, like an hour or
Yeah.
whatever. So
And I know you said as you had transitioned into her sleeping through the night, you really prioritized making sure she didn't go too long during the day without feedings, right?
yes. So, as that was happening, there were some times that she would sleep like, or not sleep, but she would go 4 hours between feedings. And I'm like, okay, that we can't do that now that she's sleeping through the night, because if she's not getting what she needs during the day, then that's going to really affect the supply too. So I tried to be really on top of it during that transition time. And even now, still, just to make sure that she is getting enough and that it's not a matter of like her losing the how many calories she's getting. Like she's still getting enough. And there are times that maybe she's napping, but right around 3 hours, I'm like, all right, like we need to wake her up because she's sleeping through the night. So we got to get all of
Yeah.
that in during the day. So yeah, I will wake her from a nap to feed her during the day.
Yeah. Well, I think that's great. And I think it's good for people to hear that it can work, that you can still exclusively breastfeed and have a baby who sleeps for long stretches or through the night. And again, everyone's experience is going to look different, but until you kind of give it a go to see how your body will respond, you won't know. And having a baby who sleeps through the night does not mean that you will not have enough supply to feed them what they need throughout the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Generally speaking, I'd love to know, were there things that were challenging about becoming a mama too that you weren't expecting? Or I would say, what have been the biggest challenges? There's always some surprises. I'm curious if anything comes to mind.
When we first talked, I had talked about logistics being challenging. And I've been pleasantly surprised that I feel like I've been ready to go. Like my sister works at a hospital right down the road, and she texted me this morning like, "Hey, could you please bring me some coffee?" She's also newly expecting, so she's like just out of her first trimester, and so I was like, yeah, I can come help you. I know those days they're hard to be at work and to be pregnant and trying to balance that. And so I just packed both of them up and we went and we got coffee and we brought it to her. And it was like not a big deal. So what I thought that was going to be super challenging, not a big deal. I would say one of the biggest challenges though, now that I'm in it, is when they both need something at the same time and feeling like I have to choose who gets what they need first. That's been really hard. And I'm sure that it's going to carry on throughout their whole life. But that typically happens, I would say, around meal times, just because Dom's not super needy anymore. I mean, he's still very needy, but in terms of my attention 100% of the time, he can play by himself. We have a room that is child proof, so he can be in there and do what he needs. But when he's in his high chair, when he's eating, he's more needy. And then if she also needs to eat, or if she's fussing or whatever, it's hard to choose one over the other. And obviously the other one will get what they need after the first one is settled or figured out. But kind of in the moment, having to choose when they're both needing something has been really challenging.
And so what I'm thinking as you're talking, and this is not to put words into your mouth, but it's that whole concept of, you find yourself wondering, could I love this second baby as much as I love this first one? And how will I share this love? And then your heart literally grows 2 sizes and you love them both so much that then you're navigating, how do I even comprehend letting one of these people down?
Right.
Because that love is so great for both of them that you're navigating, call it mom guilt or whatever, but it's just that oh, I don't want to let anyone down.
Yeah, and if that challenge didn't exist, not that it would say I don't love them, but that challenge shows how much I love both of them. That that was a worry that I had too, how am I going to love this second baby as much as I love Dominic? But yeah, sometimes the challenges show us that the love is there and it's so strong for both of them, and it's a beautiful thing to have the challenge because it shows you that you care.
And you and your husband both come from big families, and I come from a fairly large family. I'm one of 4. And I found myself thinking, how did my mom split her time amongst 4 of us? And I'm sure you've thought that multiple times. When I feel badly that my children have to share my attention, I remind myself, I was one of 4 and I don't have these memories of feeling like I was neglected. I'm sure you've thought that as coming from a large family, they're going to be okay.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I have had that. So I'm one of 4 and my husband's one of 10. So yeah, it's definitely been a thought that I'm okay, everything's going to end up okay in the end. If I have to let one be upset for a little bit, I'll get to them and they'll know that everything's okay. Or if I'm parenting in a way that's not what I think my ideal goal of parenting is, it's a moment. It's not their lifetime. They will be able to recognize that maybe isn't the parent that I am. That's not pinpointing who I am as a parent. It was just a moment, and that it can happen and we can go on to the next moment. There's so many little moments to parent and love that it doesn't all come down to one specific situation.
And that's a perspective that I will tell you I have found, and again, everyone's experience is unique. I have to remind myself of constantly. And it's just a different season, and the challenge kind of shifts what it looks like. But, I have to remind myself I'm a better parent than that moment I just had. And I will tell my kids as they get older, I will say, like, wow, I am not proud of that moment. And mommy really lost her cool. And so I hope you can keep that perspective, because I think one of the biggest challenges is to not get hung up on the moments where we're not the best version of ourselves. And that continues as they get older.
I heard that like on a podcast the other day that kind of helped me realize, because for a while I felt like I was being kind of hard on myself if I, disciplined Dominic in a way that wasn't how I would have long term wanted to parent or whatever. I found myself being like, oh, now he's going to be so upset, or this is going to change so much. But I listened to a podcast and they're like, hey, it won't change that much. Like it's going to be okay if you don't acknowledge those moments, then maybe, things might start shifting. But acknowledging like, hey, and I tell Dominic too, like, hey, I got frustrated. I'm really sorry. Like, that's not how I want to act. That's not how we should treat people. So let's reset, and whatever that may be. So I think like the other day, I think I was nursing her, and that's when he tries to get into things he knows he shouldn't. He's like, this is my time.
Yes.
And so I think I kind of like yelled at him a little too much or whatever. And he was like, mom, because I don't really raise my voice at him much. It's more of a conversation. We're trying to, like work through emotions and everything together. So he's like, mom, what's happening? And so then after I was like, hey, Dominic, I got really frustrated because you weren't listening. You weren't doing what you're supposed to be doing. I'm sorry. That's not how, we need to handle these moments. But like, what could you have done also? Like we kind of like talked through, like, let's figure out how we both could have not been in this situation. So it's helpful to acknowledge those moments.
I love that. And I'm sure people listening are thinking, well, what podcast was she listening to? Do you have a podcast that you're finding in this season is really helpful?
Raising Good Humans with...
Oh, yeah.
I can't pronounce her last name, I don't think. But Raising Good Humans was one. And then Unruffled was another one that I'd been listening to. So those two, the one about the moments came from Raising Good Humans. It was about like discipline so that they learn from it instead of just like, hey, don't do that because I said so. Like, I don't want my kid to fear me and that be the reason that they do things. Like they should find it within themselves. Like, oh, I shouldn't throw this because it is going to break something. Not because, oh, I shouldn't throw this because mom said to. Like trying to kind of figure out what that looks like in terms of discipline. So those two have been really helpful for me in the toddler parenting.
Love it. Before we wrap up, I'm curious about if you're starting to already notice a big difference in your children's personalities. So for me, granted, I've already said my children are very different, and this was true from the early days till today. And not all kids are on such opposite ends of the spectrum as mine. But I'm curious, do you already start to notice things where you think, oh, it's funny that they just naturally have these very different personalities despite only being 2 years apart?
It seems to me that Josie's a little, which is shocking, but a little more laid back. Like I would say Dominic is fairly laid back, but he's got a bundle of energy and he's got some big emotions. But like when Dom was this age, there were times that he was just unconsolable, like more times than not. He was unconsolable. Mm-hmm. And so he was, which is kind of interesting how that plays out. Like now he's not like unconsolable still, but he likes to talk, likes to play, likes to be around people. Like he has kind of like these desires to be the star of the show and to kind of do all these things, where she like, if she's sleepy and I'm rocking her, she'll just sit there and like look at me like no big deal. Like Dominic would not do that. Like he would be like throwing a big fit. Like we're not rocking. Like you need to get on that ball and you need to bounce me. Like we're not doing this. So she just seems to be a little more relaxed and laid back. We'll see how that plays out and if she keeps that or if that changes. But that's kind of what I picked up. They're both fairly easygoing, I would say, especially at this stage. But who knows? She's also a girl, and we know how girls can be, so she might throw some curveballs in there.
Well, it's interesting because now, of course, you're only 2 months in with your second, but There's so many things related to my children's personalities that I often will joke, oh, I should have known when they were 4 months old that this is how they would be, because you kind of see this thing progress where my older, was a super chatty baby, a little bit more like Dom and the like center of attention. And turns out she's very extroverted. She's a very chatty tween. And my younger daughter, a little bit more like what you're describing, just very chill. She was an observer. That's how I described her as a baby. She was very much an observer. And turns out she's an introvert. She is an observer. And she didn't cry as much, and she's much softer spoken as a child than Addison, who cried a lot more. It's funny. I just see these traits, and I have it with clients all the time where I've worked with families now, for over 5 years. And I just had a call today with someone where I've been working with them for years, and their son is 3.5. And they'll say, well, I don't know if you remember, it's been a couple years since we chatted. And I'm thinking, oh, I remember. And I am not surprised that we are here right here today with this exact situation, because this is the same little guy we worked with, and he's just growing up with different problems. But
yeah,
I find it so interesting to see how early their personality starts to show.
Yeah, absolutely. And it'll be interesting to see like how that plays out, like you're saying, like what that means for them in the long run and everything. So
fun.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else that you want to share? So anything good, bad, anything else we need to add before we wrap up?
I guess just kind of a hopeful thing for all the parents out there in the same stage of life. Like the moments can be really hard, but kind of being able to step back and see it full picture and see the beautiful life that you are introducing to this world, and how you're helping raise some really great, awesome humans. And that even though the moments might be hard and kids might not be sleeping, or they both might be needing something at the same time, that it's okay and you can make it through, and that those moments will pass, and that the years will fly by. So kind of taking in even the hard moments as much as you can, even though it's hard in the moment, to recognize that, and just realizing that you're doing the best you can, and the baby's doing the best they can, and you're both just kind of trying to figure it out. So giving grace where grace is needed, and trying to stay positive through the whole thing.
I love it. And I'm so thrilled you've had such a great experience. And I think it's important for people to see that sometimes it can be better than you expected. It can go more smoothly. So for those of you expecting that you're worrying and worrying and worrying, you might be so pleasantly surprised with how things go, whether it's your delivery, the feeding, the sleep, your postpartum experience could be better. It doesn't have to be harder or worse. And then I think it's also important to acknowledge that not everyone's experience is going to be as smooth as yours. Mine certainly wasn't. And I received an email that I had shared with you, Ellen, that really moved me from a mom who I've worked with previously, who has a lot of concerns about becoming a mom of 2. And it's funny because a lot of her concerns actually did become my reality when I became a mom of 2. And so we're going to have a follow-up episode on that, so we can kind of share both sides, how you can be pleasantly surprised with how it goes becoming a mom of 2, and then how it could also completely rock your world. But there is nothing I want more for you or other moms I know to have such a wonderful experience like you have. And I appreciate you being so open with everyone about your experience. And I'm so glad it's going so well.
Yeah, it's been great. And I hope that other moms can feel the same. And if they don't, there's hope, things will get better, and it's just a temporary phase. It'll pass.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks so much, Ellen. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you for listening to How Long Till Bedtime. To learn how we can work together to improve your child's sleep, please visit sleepandwellnesscoach.com.